Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's 3CL Travers Smith Lunchtime Seminar. Delighted to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Michael Galanis. Michael's a senior lecturer in company law at the University of Manchester. He's previously held teaching positions at Queen Mary University, London and University of Leeds. Michael's published extensively in the fields of company law and corporate governance. He's a co-author with Alan Dignam of The Globalisation of Corporate Governance. He's also practiced law in Greece as a member of the Athens Bar Association and held several government advisory posts there. In addition, he has experience as a listed company director. And Michael's paper today is perhaps the most excitingly titled paper I think we've ever had in the history of 3CL on saving the world with or from corporate law, a silent death for the corporation. So,
or something like that. Hello. Had a bit of a privatized railways journey today, but at least I made it, so that's really good. So this is a paper which is still, well, it's halfway through, or a bit more than that. In a sense, it's still work in progress. If you see any issues that you think definitely need to be addressed, please be frank and strict, and this is what I need from this event today. As an introduction, this is a bit of a, or it may turn out to be a bit of a pessimistic paper about corporate law. I don't treat this as a corporate law paper. It's about corporate law of the corporation. It has three different starting points. The first one, I forgot my notes. The first one is this controversial book by these two economists. Vogel eventually got a Nobel Prize, not for this book, but for other work he did. Well, it was controversial because it was a study on cotton picking and slavery in the southern US states. And surprisingly for them, they found that slavery is pretty efficient, not only for the economy, but for, to some extent, for slaves as well, if you disregard the occasional whipping that they got. Apparently they had slightly higher living standards than their equivalent workers in the north. So they were shocked by this, or at least Vogel was shocked by this, because as an economist, you would expect that he would be shocked, thinking that efficiency may not be the right principle to follow. Maybe there are other things that we need to look at, moral values and stuff like that, that most economists don't really adhere to. So he went off to write another book on this kind of stuff in favor of shifting away focus from efficiency and dealing with other issues or values. The second point is Piketty's renowned book on capitalism, where he effectively claims that capitalism has a problem with unequal wealth distribution. The third starting point is Paddy Ireland's, well, the photo is missing from there, but I think most of us know Paddy anyway. And it's an old paper that he did in the mid-90s about capitalism and corporate law, where he eventually concludes that it's a historical overview of corporate law, where he concludes that the corporation essentially symbolizes industrial capital. So its nature is is symbolic of industrial capital. So the paper is an attempt to try to bring these things together in order to eventually make a proposition in relation to the corporation. So my starting point is quite similar to Paddy Ireland's in the sense that it looks at the history of the corporation and of corporate law. It looks at what the corporation actually is, but not as a metaphysical being, but not its metaphysical nature, but its nature within social practice. So how does society look at corporation? How is it conceived within society? So I go back quite a long time into antiquity. Romans probably they had corporations. Maybe ancient Greeks had corporations as well, but they were used in a similar way to mercantilism, to what we see in the mercantilist era, where effectively corporations were public contractors or public organizations. The state had full control over the corporations, and the corporations performed public or quasi-public purposes. Things begin to change with capitalism. So in the early era of capitalism, we still have corporations, but in the quasi-public form. And the private sector was organized without the use of the corporate form. So it was mainly private partnerships, they used trust. It was unincorporated associations primarily. Until the mid-19th century, where we have the dramatic, in my view at least, or perhaps not only my view, change. The corporation as an institution, as a tool, was privatized. So it became available, it was offered to private business. From then on, I think the story is quite well known. We see that corporations become pretty dominant as an organizational form in the private sector, and not only. Of course, we still have public corporations. We reach the era where that Chandler discussed in his seminal work on the managerial visible hand. So his claim is that due to new public infrastructure, the growth of the marketplace, there were opportunities for profit through increasing scale and scope of corporations. That was exploited by the managerial class, who are now in control of the large corporations instead of the shareholders or the entrepreneurs. We have the multidivisional form arising, which was then transformed into what we now know, or is more predominant, the subsidiarized corporation. I use the term corporation in a more open-ended way in this sense. This is the group of companies that we see today. So now we have the bureaucratic corporation. This is what Chandler describes, and it's a private bureaucracy. It serves private interests, directly at least. In the latest era, perhaps the current state of affairs is slightly modified or considerably modified depending on where somebody is on the map. So we have the financialized corporation. The corporation has become a commodity itself. So we see the market for corporate control. We see the divestment of what were formerly known as divisions, as in the form of subsidiaries. So it's still, though, a corporate bureaucracy. I know Michael Galanis in the late 80s claimed that the market for corporate control will lead to the eclipse of the public corporation. It didn't happen, in short. So the point I'm trying to make through this review is that the corporation is an old thing, very old. As we will see on the next slide, it hasn't really changed very much. Its structure is quite standard. What does change is how we conceive the corporation, or how society, that's us, okay, conceives the corporation. So the corporation and its goals are reconceptualized by or within each social historical context. So Paddy Ireland, I think, is correct, but only partly. It does symbolize capital, but within the capitalist context. Before this context, it was something different. After capitalism, if we ever experience this, it may be something different, or it probably will be something different. So the question then is, can it become something else? How can we establish whether it can become something else within capitalism? I'm not arguing that this is possible. As you will see in the end, I'm arguing that this is impossible. But I need to make the claim. So if we look at the primary goals of the corporate bureaucracy within the capitalist social historical, we see that in the managerialist era, according to the managerialist literature, those in control of the company favor the company's growth in scale and scope of activities, maximizing sales revenue, we're being told, through aggressive marketing, through strategic behavior to control markets, and so on. In the latest financialized managerial era, it's still managerialism. I think we have a coalition now between financial interests and managerial interests, which has led to a slight shift, or considerable shift, in the objectives, the primary goals of the corporation. So we still have the growth objective being there, but growth doesn't necessarily need to be expressed in sales. We have the financial, growth on the basis of asset price speculation coming to prominence, gradually or significantly. So we have the common debate on growth versus profit, and do we grow the company or do we make it more profitable, and so on. But it's still, in both eras, we are looking at wealth accumulation, whether that's financialized or not. It's still the objective of wealth accumulation. So my second conclusion is that within the capitalist era, the corporate goal has been aligned with this thing, infinite wealth accumulation. It hasn't always been like that, as we've seen, but now it is. Now, Chandler's story focused on opportunities created by the enlarged markets and so on. That managers were very effective in exploiting and therefore expanding their corporations. Now, what Chandler's account doesn't talk about is why. Why did managers actually do this? Why didn't they just ignore these profit opportunities? Why didn't they feel satisfied with the corporation as it was? Why did they want to expand to the whole US market, the globe, and so on? This is not just about Chandler's account, it's a more general claim. So why infinite accumulation? To answer this, I had to turn back to the literature on the social roots of capitalism. And effectively, this is one of the primary figures, okay, Max Weber. Again, photo is missing, but it's okay. So his claim in the Protestant ethic is that there was a significant social change that gave rise to capitalism and modernity, or modern capitalism as we know it now. He talks about the disenchantment of society, so we don't believe that we live under a God's plan. Now we can rely on our own capabilities as humans, our rationality. Of course, Renaissance was instrumental in this. So his claim is that in the disenchanted world or society, the rationalization becomes prevalent. So we have the prevalence of what he calls instrumental rationality. It's primarily of an economic type. So the claim would be, if slave labor is efficient, we need to keep it. And we have. Okay? Whether we would like to accept it or not. And this then leads to, I don't know if you can read it back there, but Mark told me that he has distributed the slides, so you can read it on your own computers. His claim is that, or he conceptualized the capitalist spirit in these quotes quite nicely, I think. This is a very condensed text. So he talks about wealth accumulation, more and more money, he says, as purely an end in itself. That's the infinity. This is what we are striving for. So it's not a means to an end. So we don't accumulate money or wealth because we want to live a better life or to eat better food and so on. We do it for its own sake. And we do it even if this is absolutely irrational. Doesn't make sense. And in the end, we end up being dominated by this spirit. We cannot do otherwise. That's what we have to do if we want to survive. So he talks about the reversal of what we call the natural relationship, the means to an end as opposed to being an end in itself. So he goes on further down. Capitalism is identical with the pursuit of profit, forever renewed profits, using the rational organization. So this is the explanation, I think, that he provides and that is missing from Chandler's account. So how does this link with corporate law? I mentioned earlier that corporate law has been quite stable, since Roman times at least. the Roman public corporation was virtually the same as the one we have now. So these are the well-known features that we see today. Corporate personality, it's a fictitious legal person. Shareholders enjoy limited liability. There is a governance structure, fairly standard for a long time. Directors' duties, even globally, they're quite similar. Yeah, okay, the nitty-gritty, of course, is different, but their essence is quite similar. And of course, the share has emerged as a transferable instrument. So the first three are very well rationalized by people like Hasman and Krachman, Margaret Blair. They establish their mechanisms for shielding the entity from third parties. There are also mechanisms for shielding the owners of the corporation. And this makes possible the emergence of the share as a tradable instrument, which leads to the commodification of the corporation, the stuff I mentioned earlier. So the legal nature of the corporation is pretty standard over the centuries. What has changed is that the corporation was privatized in the 19th century. And I'm claiming that, well, I don't think it's a very original claim, but the conclusion I'm reaching here is that the privatized corporate law had found an excellent fit with the capitalist spirit that Weber talks about. And this applies to both the industrial era, the Chandlerian era, and the financialized era. Corporate law, without changing at all, has adapted really well in both eras of capitalism. And not only that, it has become a key instrument, a key tool for the emergence of the bureaucratic capitalism. What do I mean by this? It's what Chandler describes. There is no market as we know it. Markets are oligopolies. They are basically controlled by big players, and so on. So what we describe as the marketplace effectively is highly bureaucratized through the corporation. So this dominance of the corporation needed some justifications, and this is where corporate governance debates become relevant. I think it's pretty fair to start with Weber's justifications for bureaucracy in general, which apply to corporate bureaucracy as well. In his writings, he conceives those ideal types of organization. And bureaucracy, he describes an ideal type of bureaucracy as well. These are concepts which can be used as analytical tools more than descriptions of reality. So look at this statement here. Bureaucracy, as such, is a precision instrument which can put itself at the disposal of quite varied, purely political, as well as purely economic or other sort of interests of domination. How does he justify this? Well, he says, because bureaucracies, what are they? If you look at them, what are the procedures? Ideally, these procedures, this is the ideal type he's talking about, are based on meritocracy, are meritocratic, not based on other social beliefs, on, I don't know, feudal beliefs or spiritual beliefs and so on. They're rational in this sense. Accountability mechanisms. Okay, and especially these accountability mechanisms and these processes are mechanisms of domination, of imposing the objective through the whole bureaucracy so as to be that precision instrument for pursuing the goals we assign to it. So the issue then is, okay, who sets the goals? If you look at his writings, he's not very clear. He's quite skeptical as well. But someone else has to do this. It's not the bureaucracy itself. He talks about charismatic leaders, political leaders, the entrepreneur, which doesn't exist anymore, or not in the sense that we think the entrepreneur exists. So the goal-setting issue is a problem that we will look at again. Now, this is an ideal time. People started talking about bureaucracy, how effective it is, trying to look at its effectiveness in reality, how close are we to the ideal type, and some people say, yes, we are. Others, this is the heterodox critique, claim that no, bureaucracies are not rational, as Weber's ideal type is. So their procedures diverge from the instrumental rationality principle that his ideal type is supposed to adopt and serve. We have Herbert Marcuse's critique, that's capitalist bureaucracy furthers consumerism and economic determinism, everything becomes an economic function, and so on. I've highlighted the last two because I think they're more relevant for my paper. Later on, at least. It's some more modern critique, some slightly more modern critique of bureaucracy in the sense that it tends to lead to a closure of meaning of things through the formalization of procedural formalization, which excludes alternatives. This is the goal we've set. If you think, as an employee or as a member of the bureaucracy, that something else needs to be done, we don't care. Castoriadis' critique is also important, I think, in the sense that he also focuses on meaning of things, and he claims that this is not a closure necessarily, it's a destruction of meaning. What is bureaucracy? It's abstraction at the end of the day. So these processes that we try to implement effectively treat qualitative differences, questions of value into questions of quantity, especially mathematical or economic quantity, economic value. And this destroys meaning altogether. There are gross generalizations and abstractions with no rational basis in the end. So he disagrees with Weber in this sense. They claim that in reality this doesn't apply, at least not to the extent that the ideal type envisages. But this is not what Weber said and claimed anyway. For the purpose of the paper, we can conclude that corporate bureaucracy then is a driver of instrumental rationality, even if it's not a perfect one. It does have this tendency. But within corporate capitalism, within the corporate bureaucracy, we have a reversal of Weber's claim in this statement. Now we have the bureaucracy dictating its purposes, not somebody else, because that somebody else has disappeared. We don't have the entrepreneur, we don't have the charismatic leader. So this now corporate bureaucracy creates a social feedback loop of economic determinism. So they are the precision instrument, or not so precise, but the instrument that promotes instrumental rationality or that will implement instrumentally rational whatever goals we assign to it, but it also assigns its own goals, which is wealth accumulation, which is a capitalist spirit. So the capitalist spirit feeds bureaucracy, and bureaucracy feeds the capitalist spirit. So we have this reversal of the natural relationship that's, where is it now? Weber talks about between wealth accumulation and human beings. Weber was quite skeptical about bureaucracy. He talks about the iron cage. So he has his hesitations about the social value of bureaucracy, or where it's leading society to. Okay, if you're instrumentally rational enough to care about numbers, bureaucratization increases. That is not on the decrease. You can see that bureaucrats, or people working as bureaucrats, managers, are on the rise. And that's the US, which is meant to be less bureaucratic than Europe. This is an interesting report by Deloitte Australia, where they found that people spend most of the time for the purpose of complying with bureaucratic rules as opposed to legal rules in their organization. This is the private sector. Okay? So obviously, within corporate capitalism, we have we're not. I don't think it's surprising that corporate law theory is so immersed in this logic of economic determinism, of wealth accumulation. So I won't bore you with this debate between stakeholder corporation, the shareholder corporation, the mandatory versus default rules, because they both share some common grounds. Primarily, they both accept that the objective of the corporation is wealth accumulation. The problem is, how do we distribute it? So the governance issue is a distributional issue. Or at best, they talk about the distribution and who should decide what the rule of distribution will be, the state or the government. This is the mandatory versus default corporate law rules. So they both assume unreflexively that the corporation or the corporate objective is an economic one, an economic issue, an economic question. And therefore they're part of this loop I described earlier. In the paper I also deal with some moral claims. There are some arguments based on morality, but they still talk about the distribution of wealth. They don't really question why wealth accumulation, why not something else. So how can we break this loop? Well, I'm using the work of Castoriadis on this point, and his concept of the social imaginary. Very briefly, Castoriadis claims that economic determinism, or what we're experiencing now, the capitalist spirit, is self-imposed. And if it's self-imposed, it's for us to get rid of it, if we don't like it. If we like it, we can keep it. So this is like an argument on, or a discussion of how to escape from Vogel's dilemma or Piketty's determinism, and corporate law's determinism as well. So it's quite a complex theory. He tries to use psychoanalysis and social theory. I'll try to be as brief as possible on this. So he starts from the psyche, and he claims that human beings or our psyche is never fully determined. It is determinable, but never fully determined, because there is a part of the unconscious that is a chaotic, and it creates new images, new things. This is our radical imagination. New images that haven't existed before, from nothing. And this also happens at the social level. And at the social level, he talks about the operation of central signification, so creations of the social imaginary, which are there as values, as ways of rationalizing everything around us. Okay, this is the logic of the system, determined by these significations. So societies, through the institution of these significations, start giving meaning to everything else within the social historical. So societies are then self-instituting and self-instituted. Self-instituting means that this is an ongoing process, it never ends. It keeps happening. The only problem is when the instituted society, what we already have, the current central significations stick. And they can stick to such an extent that eventually we think that they've been given to us and that they are natural, they are eternal, and they're not socially made. So eventually he claims that in order to regain our social autonomy, we need to emphasize the instituting functions of society and liberate our radical imaginary as human beings in order to be able to imagine how else we could live our lives instead of the current state of affairs, or how we can organize our society instead of accepting what we have now, or at least evaluate. He talks about an elucidation, lucid evaluation or reflection on what institutions we currently use. And he talks about the autonomous society, which is effectively a democratic society. He gives certain justifications for this. So going back to capitalism, what he says, he expands with the Weberian claim by looking, and deepens it by looking into the human psyche. He finds that the roots are there in the psyche. Why? Because since the social disenchantment, we don't have now the God's plan to dominate our life. So we don't know that what's going to happen after death. So we have to deal with this problem. Our psyche has to deal with this problem. So our psyche has created an antidote to this, which is the belief that we are omnipotent, that we can master nature. I'm not saying this is rational, but this is what has happened, he claims. And that's why he calls it a pseudo-mastery of nature. It's not a rational thing, it's just something that we believe. And this is the central signification of capitalism, of the disenchanted society. And as a result, we have found the perpetual accumulation of capital as a way of satisfying or dealing with this insecurity about death. And this is the foundation of capitalism and modernity. So he ends up with statements like this. It's a historical form of the imaginary, and Walter Benjamin takes it even further. capitalism has become a religion. So we got rid of God, and now we have wealth accumulation. So the dogma is quite familiar to us. I think markets are natural. The market is a natural, original state of affairs. The Homo economicus, as it is envisioned in economics, asocial and historical. This is our purpose in life, and therefore the corporation is constituted in accordance with this thing, with this transcendental vision of society, of ourselves. I'm not really dealing with Marxist economic determinism because it suffers from the same problems. So my claim here is that it's not about ascertaining wealth accumulation and fair distribution, but it's about why these purposes and not something else. So this is what one has to do if we accept Castoriadis' view. So in order to break the loop in corporate law as well, we need to do three things. I think these are okay. I have a major problem with this one. I think it's the most difficult one. How to deal with corporate objectives, how corporate objectives should be determined and modified in order to ensure that we're autonomous. We're not self-determined, or we're not determined by economic rationality. And the problem is that can we do this with retaining the bureaucratic elements, the corporate bureaucracy? Can we do this within the capitalist imaginary? No. So what can we do with corporate law? And I think this is the last slide, but the most pessimistic one. Do nothing, leave it as it is, or try to mitigate the distributional problem as, try to use a progressive approach, for example, equal distribution of wealth. I think this is probably, I wonder if this is the majority. This could be probably the majority of the minority of people. Democratize the corporation. This is probably the minority's minority. I don't know, is anyone left for this? I'm not so sure. I asked my students, it was a class of 200 students, can you imagine the world without a corporation? Nobody said yes. Nobody out of 200 students, unless they were asleep. This is another paper I'm working on at the moment. I'm afraid I don't have the answer to this. Okay. Thank you very much. I overrun as usual.